It's a heavy question. You look at the news, you read history books. It seems like we've always been fighting. War feels like a permanent part of the human story. But was it always there? Did our earliest ancestors, the hunter gatherers of the Stone Age, wage war? Or is it a newer, uglier invention? The question gets right to the heart of who we think we are. Are we fundamentally violent creatures with war baked into our DNA, or are we naturally peaceful and something in civilization corrupted us? For a long time, people had a romantic idea about the past. They pictured early humans living in simple, peaceful harmony with nature. Small bands of people wandering a vast, empty world. They shared everything. They had no property to fight over, no kings or generals to command them. If a conflict got bad, one group could just pack up and move a few valleys over. All problem solved. This was the peaceful savage idea. It suggested that war came much later. It came with farming, with cities, with wealth. It came with civilization. There's some logic to this. For most of our history, for hundreds of thousands of years, we were hunter-gatherers. Our species, Homo sapiens, appeared around 300,000 years ago. Agriculture only started about 12,000 years ago. That's a tiny slice of our total time on Earth. So, for 95% of our existence, we lived in that old way. Life was tough. The main struggle was against starvation, disease, and predators. Cooperating with your small group of 25 to 50 people wasn't just a nice idea. It was the only way to survive. You needed each other to hunt large animals, to gather plants, to care for children, and to protect each other from a saber-toothed cat. Fighting your neighbor from the next band over seemed like a waste of energy, a fatal distraction. And for a long time, the archaeological evidence seemed to support this peaceful view. Scientists found plenty of skeletons from the deep past, the Paleolithic era, but they didn't find many with clear signs of violence. No big piles of bodies with spear points in their ribs. No fortified settlements, the evidence just wasn't there. So the conclusion seemed simple. Early humans were mostly peaceful. War was a product of the Neolithic Revolution, the shift to farming. Then, things started to get more complicated. Archaeologists began finding things that didn't fit the peaceful picture. The evidence started to build, slowly at first, then more forcefully. It suggested a darker side to our ancient past. One of the most important and disturbing sites is called Jebel Sahaba. It's in Sudan, near the Nile River, and it's about 13,000 years old. It's a cemetery, but it's not a normal cemetery. Archaeologists found 59 skeletons there. Men, women, and children. And at least 24 of them, almost half, showed clear signs of a violent death. They had stone spear points and arrowheads embedded in their bones. Some were found right inside their chests or skulls. One man had 20 different wounds. A child was found with a projectile point lodged in its spine. This was not a random collection of individual murders. This was different. The weapons were all the same type, suggesting they were killed by a single organized group. The number of victims, their ages, the brutality of it all. It looked like a massacre. It looked like a battle. It looked like war. And Jebel Sahaba is not a one-off. Other sites have added to the picture. In Germany, a 7,000-year-old mass grave at Talheim contained the bodies of 34 people, all killed by blows to the head from the same type of stone axe. They were farmers, not hunter-gatherers, but it showed the potential for extreme group violence in a pre-state society. Further back, in Kenya, near Lake Turkana, a site called Nataruk tells an even older story. It dates to about 10,000 years ago, a time when people in the area were still hunter-gatherer fishers. The remains of at least 27 people were found there. They weren't buried. They were left where they fell, near a lagoon. The skeletons at Nataruk are chillin'. One man was found with a blade of obsidian, a sharp volcanic glass, still stuck in his skull. Another had his hands bound. A pregnant woman was found in a sitting position, her skeleton showing signs of blunt force trauma to her head and knees. This wasn't a fight over resources in a structured way. This looks like an attack meant to wipe people out, with no one spared. These are groups of people. But what about individuals? We have evidence for them too. Otzi the Iceman, the famous 5,300-year-old mummy found frozen in the Alps, died a violent death. For years, people thought he just froze in a blizzard. But then a researcher found an arrowhead lodged deep in his shoulder, which had severed a major artery. He bled to death in minutes. He also had a deep cut on his hand, a defensive wound from a fight a day or two before he was killed. Someone hunted Otzi down and shot him in the back. Or look at Kennewick Man, a 9,000-year-old skeleton found in Washington state. He had lived a hard life, but most notably he had a stone spear point healed inside his hip bone. He had survived an attack years before he died of other causes. It shows that lethal violence was part of his world. So the physical evidence from bones is there. It's not everywhere, but it exists. It tells us that our ancestors were perfectly capable of killing each other, sometimes in organized, brutal ways. But what about other kinds of evidence? Cave art, for example, in caves across Australia, Europe, and Africa, there are ancient paintings. Many show animals and hunts, but some seem to show something else. In northern Australia, some rock art that could be 10,000 years old depicts lines of men armed with spears and boomerangs facing off against each other. Some figures are shown falling, pierced with projectiles. It's hard to interpret these scenes with certainty. Are they depicting real battles? Are they myths? Rituals? We can't know for sure. But they show that the idea of organized group conflict was present in the minds of these ancient people. This all paints a pretty grim picture. It suggests that violence, and maybe even war, has deep roots. It pushes back against the idea of a peaceful past. But why? Why would small bands of hunter-gatherers who depended on cooperation fight each other? The simple answer is that life wasn't always simple. The world wasn't always a vast, empty paradise. There were times of stress. Climate change, for example. The end of the Ice Age brought huge environmental shifts. Some areas became richer, with more fish, birds, and plants. Other areas dried up. People who had lived a certain way for generations might have found their food sources disappearing. Jebel Sahaba, the site of the massacre in Sudan, is a good example. The people there lived during a time of intense climate instability. The Nile Valley would have been a rich oasis in a drying landscape. It was a desirable place to be. Competition for those resources could have become fierce. When survival is on the line, when your children are starving, the line between us and them can become very sharp. The people at Jebel Sahaba weren't just fighting for honor and territory in an abstract sense. They may have been fighting for their very existence. This wasn't war for glory. It was a desperate, brutal struggle over the resources needed to live. So maybe war isn't something that's always on, a constant state of being. Maybe it's more like a switch. In good times, when resources are plentiful and population is low, peace and cooperation are the best strategies. But in bad times, when people are squeezed and resources are scarce, the switch for group violence can be flipped. To understand this better, it helps to look at our closest living relatives, chimpanzees and bonobos. We share a common ancestor with them who lived about 6 or 7 million years ago. By studying their behavior, we can get clues about the deep evolutionary roots of our own. For a long time, we thought chimpanzees were basically peaceful vegetarians. Then, in the 1970s, researcher Jane Goodall witnessed something shocking in Gombe, Tanzania. The chimp community she had been studying for years split into two groups. The larger northern group began a systematic campaign of violence against the smaller southern group. It was brutal and calculated. Small patrols of males would go into the rival territory, find an isolated male, and beat him to death. Over 4 years, they killed all the males of the southern group and took over their territory. Goodall called it a war. It was organized, group-level violence with a clear territorial goal. Since then, scientists have observed similar behavior in other chimpanzee groups. They patrol their borders, they are intensely territorial, they will kill outsiders. This discovery was a bombshell. It suggested that the capacity for lethal group violence, the raw ingredients for war, didn't begin with Homo sapiens. It might go back millions of years to the common ancestor we share with chimps. It could be part of our primate heritage. This is the demonic males theory. It argues that we, like chimps, evolved a tendency for males to form coalitions and use lethal aggression to defend or expand territory and access to females. It's a bleak view of human nature. It suggests we have an innate, evolved predisposition for this kind of violence. But there's a twist in the family tree. We are just as closely related to another ape, the bonobo. And bonobos are completely different. They live in groups south of the Congo River, and their societies are famously peaceful. They are not nearly as territorial as chimps. When two bonobo groups meet, they don't fight. They often mingle, groom each other, and share food. They are famous for using sex to resolve tension. Instead of fighting, they make love. Their societies are also more female-centered. So, we have two cousins, both equally related to us. One is a territorial, violent killer. The other is a peaceful, free, loving diplomat. Which one are we? The chimp model suggests war is in our nature. The bonobo model suggests peace is. The truth is, we aren't either one, we are human. And what that seems to mean is that we have the potential for both behaviors. We have the chimp's capacity for xenophobia and lethal violence, and we have the bonobo's capacity for cooperation, empathy, and reconciliation. The story isn't about which ape we are, it's about which tendencies our environment and our culture encourage. For most of the Stone Age, in small, mobile groups, the bonobo-like tendencies for cooperation and avoidance of conflict probably dominated. But when conditions got tough, like they did at Jebel Sahaba, the chimp-like tendencies could emerge with terrifying force. Then came the biggest change in human history, the invention of agriculture. This is the moment when everything shifted. It was around 12,000 years ago. Instead of wandering to find food, people learned to grow it. They settled down in one place. They built villages, then towns, then cities. They started to accumulate property. A field of wheat, a herd of cattle, a granary full of food. This changed the calculus of conflict completely. First, there was finally something valuable and immovable to fight over. You can't steal a hunter-gatherer's territory in the same way you can steal a farmer's land. The land itself, the crops in the ground, became the prize. And once you harvest that grain, you have a surplus. Stored wealth. Now your village is a tempting target for raiders. Second, people are no longer mobile. A farming community can't just pack up and move if there's trouble. They are tied to their land, their investment of labor. So they have to stay and fight. This is when we see the first signs of defensive structures. The famous walls of Jericho, built around 9,000 years ago, are a classic example. You don't build a massive stone wall unless you're afraid of someone attacking you. All over the world, as agriculture spread, people started building walls, ditches, and palisades. Third, populations grew. Farming can support many more people in a smaller area than hunting and gathering. This led to more people, more villages, and more friction between groups. The world started to feel smaller. And fourth, a new social structure emerged. In a farming village, some families might have better land or more livestock. Social inequality began. Leaders emerged who could organize labor, they could organize the building of a wall. They could also organize a group of men for a raid. The war party was born. The evidence for warfare explodes after the adoption of agriculture. Mass graves become more common. Skeletons with horrific injuries become more common. Fortified settlements become the norm in many places. As weapons become more specialized, we see stone maces designed specifically for crushing skulls. We see daggers, we see the development of the sword. This isn't just about hunting anymore. These are tools made for killing other people. Does this mean the peaceful past idea was right after all? Did agriculture invent war? Not exactly. It seems more accurate to say that the potential for war was always there. It was part of our primate heritage, a dark capacity we carried with us. Hunter-gatherer life, for the most part, kept that capacity in check. The conditions weren't right for it to flourish. It only emerged in rare, desperate situations. Agriculture didn't invent the flame of war. It poured gasoline on it. It created all the conditions necessary for war to become a common, organized, and truly destructive feature of human life. It gave people reasons to fight land, wealth. It gave them the means to fight larger populations, organize leadership, and it took away the primary option for avoiding fight's mobility. So, to go back to the original question, did early humans go to war? The answer isn't a simple yes or no. It depends. It depends on how you define early humans and how you define war. If by early humans you mean our deep Paleolithic ancestors living 50,000 or 100,000 years ago, then organized war, as we think of it, was probably extremely rare or non-existent. There was certainly violence. People got angry, they killed each other, but a sustained, organized conflict between two groups was probably not a feature of their lives. Their social structure and environment worked against it. If you mean humans living at the very end of the hunter-gatherer era, in a time of climate stress and increasing population density, then the answer is yes, it seems they did. Sites like Jebel Sahaba and Nataruk are powerful evidence that organized group violence, what we could call war, did happen before the invention of farming. These were not state-level societies with armies and generals, but they were groups of people, armed and organized, killing other groups of people. That's war in its most basic form. So the capacity for war is ancient. It's rooted in our evolution. Our primate cousins show us that. But the practice of war, its frequency and its scale, seems to be a more recent problem. It wasn't our natural, everyday state. It was a response to specific pressures. The Neolithic Revolution was the turning point. It created a world where those pressures were constant. It created a world where warfare became a viable, and sometimes profitable, strategy. It scaled up the violence from small massacres to battles, campaigns, and empires. This conclusion is both depressing and hopeful. It's depressing because it suggests that the capacity for this kind of organized cruelty is part of us. It's not some alien thing that civilization forced upon us. It's a dark potential that has been with our lineage for a very long time. We can't pretend it's not there, but it's also hopeful. It tells us that war is not inevitable. It's not a biological command that we must obey. For the vast majority of our species' history, we didn't engage in it. Peace was the norm. Our ancestors survived for hundreds of thousands of years because they were excellent cooperators, not because they were excellent warriors. And we have the bonobo in us just as much as the chimp. War is conditional. It depends on the context. It thrives in conditions of scarcity, inequality, and high-stakes competition over resources. It withers in conditions of security, cooperation, and shared interests. We can't change our evolutionary past, but we can change the conditions we live in now. The story of early human warfare isn't a verdict that condemns us to an eternity of conflict. It's a warning. It shows us the switch that exists inside us, and it shows us the kinds of pressures that can flip it. The challenge is to build a world where that switch is rarely, if ever, thrown.